Good evening, folks. This is The Weird Part, and I am your host, Vincent Treewell. Tonight is going to be a little bit different. This will be a solo broadcast, so it's just my voice going on and on and on. But I do think that I have an interesting topic, and something that maybe hasn't been covered all that much. I have to give thanks to Timothy Renner for first to my knowledge, mentioning this series of incidents which happened in Wisconsin, on his show Strange Familiars, which I am an avid listener and Patreon. And once again, he got me with knowing some paranormal, weird happenings in my own state that I was completely unaware of. So thank you very much, Tim. And I had to follow up on it and find what was really going on. Spoiler alert, I don't know what was really going on. I will not be solving this mystery, but I will talk about it for a while, and I think it's one that you will find interesting. It is the story of the Mineral Point vampire. Mineral Point, Wisconsin is a small town, what most people would probably call a village, in western Wisconsin, not all that far from Richland Center, in an area that is maybe now infamously called the Driftless region, which is simply an area of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and a little bit of Iowa that wasn't crushed by the glacier, and so is much more hill country, somewhat similar in terrain to Appalachia. And Mineral Point was a mining town many years ago. But the incident which we're going to be speaking about tonight the first incident, the primary incident, occurred in 1981. In fact, it occurred almost exactly 42 years ago. And to quote at some length from the April 2nd, 1981 copy of the Wisconsin State Journal, which the Wisconsin State Journal is one of the two most large, mainstream, serious newspapers in the state of Wisconsin. Headline reads, "Vampires Stalk Mineral Point. Count Dracula has arrived in this small former lead mining community. For the last several nights, police have been plagued with reports of vampires jumping out of the shadows around the downtown area, scaring people. It all started Monday night when police officer John Pepper encountered a strange-looking person in the cemetery," said Police Lieutenant Bill Trout. According to Pepper's report, he was routinely shining his light through the Graceland Cemetery when it flashed on a huge person with a white-painted face wearing a dark cape. Pepper ran after the dark stranger and lost him, or it, among the gravestones. He later described the fleeing vampire as being 6'3" and ugly. "Last night, Tuesday, we had a half-dozen vampires on the loose in town," Trott said. "We received several phone calls and were stopped by people on the street reporting encounters with white-faced, creepy-looking people jumping out of the shadows at them. While Trott and several Iowa County sheriff's officers chased vampires around town, they were unable to catch any." Trott blamed the rash of vampires Tuesday night on pranksters who had heard of Pepper's Monday night encounter. "We will probably have vampires around here for the next 2 weeks now that they think they can get away with it and scare a few people," Trott said. The lieutenant said his department has had problems in the past with vandalism at the cemetery. There was no damage Monday night. "I don't know if there was any out there last night. I can't get anyone to go back to the cemetery at night," Trott said. "I even offered to pay John Pepper overtime to stake the place out for his vampire, but he wouldn't bite," the lawman added with a chuckle. This was taken quite seriously by local law enforcement, and was a very real incident at the time. And I have to say that, based on my own experiences, if you're a cop and you encounter something that is odd, especially in this 1981, this pre-X-Files era. You have to be pretty serious about it to report it. It was not, you don't do a police report to do a prank. That, like, really doesn't happen. So whatever Officer Pepper saw, he definitely saw something that he believed was worth making an official document about. And yes, then I'm sure there were plenty of pranksters and people out to have a good time by freaking somebody out. But there was still a real documented event where a on-duty law officer sees a apparently very tall man dressed in vampirish garb take off, chases after him, and leaps a fence that it seems dubious at best he would really be able to leap. And of course, that, reminds me of Spring Hill Jack. It reminds me of various other cryptids and odd one-off beings that somehow manage to defy the laws of nature. So, this was investigated, no conclusion was ever reached, no arrests were ever made. Whoever it was, whatever it was, just seemed to disappear for quite some time. But that was not to be the end of the story. I'd also like to just point out that the sentence, while Lieutenant Trott and several Iowa County Sheriff's officers chased vampires around town, they were unable to catch any, strikes me as being one of the better sentences I've ever read in the newspaper, just for what it's worth. It may be a testimony to the decline of conventional print journalism, but despite putting in at least triple the amount of effort, I was unable to find even one, what I would call mainstream media, article on the 2004 and 2008 Mineral Point vampire incidents, even though both were reported to law enforcement, both were taken seriously, and both had multiple witnesses. So, in reconstructing those incidents, I had to use online sources. An excellent article in Ranker by April A. Taylor, an equally valuable article in Wisconsinology by Frank Anderson, and a couple of blog posts by Rick Hale in paranormalstudy.com and Dr. Fright at drfright.blogspot.com, both of which were extremely valuable to putting this together. And in between those sources, there's a widespread confirmation of the significant facts. In 2004, the town of Mineral Point experienced a very strange situation where numerous witnesses reported to police, who arrived and took it quite seriously, that a man dressed in a cape and dark clothes was in a tree, lashing out, jumping out of the tree, and apparently lunging and biting at people. The police did arrive, did see a person fitting that description, did pursue him, and then he reached a large wall and either leaped over it or simply disappeared, but there were reports of footprints in the snow on one side of the wall and nothing on the other side of the wall. And the suspect was never seen again. A very unusual situation, and one which incidentally takes place also in March. The 1981 original incident took place in late March of 81. The 04 encounter also takes place on March 14th of 2004. So there seems to be a seasonal aspect. And interestingly, it'd be a lot less weird if this was happening right around Halloween instead of in March. That doesn't seem to be, a prankster's forte. But that's, take it for what it's worth. The 2008 sighting, where a young man and woman were out fishing on the docks, um, and were encountered a very strange looking individual that they described as looking like a vampire, and which they fled from and reported to police. Police arrived and did look for it. Him, them. Police looked around, could find nothing. They did make note that the couple had left their fishing gear laying on the pier and fled in what was apparently a state of fear. So there's just there's several things that I notice about this and that, I think bear mentioning. One thing that rather leaps out at me, no pun intended, is that Mineral Point isn't called Mineral Point for no reason. It was an old mining town. In fact, it lost a significant amount of population when the California Gold Rush happened back in 1849. So there's a long tradition of mining in that area, specifically right in Mineral Point. Lead mines were the major industry. And lead mining used to be huge in Wisconsin, as can be seen on the Wisconsin state flag, where there's literally bars of lead. By the way, nobody knew lead was dangerous then. But there has been observed by many researchers and investigators a significant incident, a recurring pattern of incidents involving mining and buried treasure and all forms of the paranormal. Whether we're talking about Bigfoot in the Ape Canyon incident, where they were going to search for gold and look for a gold mine, or whether we're talking about the Hopkinsville goblins, or whether in an abandoned mine, or the goblins from Hellier, or there's frequently a strange connection between digging into the earth and things coming out. Not necessarily out of the earth, but things appearing. Whether they be UFOs, strange lights, ghost activity, Sasquatch activity, goblins, or in this case, apparently a really tall vampire. This is, to me, a most unusual entity, but the mining connection, the underground connection, and I would include caves, though they're not human-made, still entry into the underworld, the literal world under the ground, is often present at hotspots for various types of paranormal activity. And in this case, this seems to be one as well. What I find kind of baffling about this is that it's not a one-off. There are very strange encounters that people have, including multiple people, and then the thing just stops and it disappears and it's never seen again. This seems to come back in a very, you're not going to mistake something dressed up like the image of a vampire for something else. And yet, it comes back only very rarely, every so many years, and not by any set pattern. I was thinking, of course, of the film's Jeepers Creepers, where the creature's allowed to feed, I think it's every 13 years. There's no set pattern like that here. There's something that apparently the same entity returns from time to time, but it's tough to tell what that timing would be related to. And to cut to the quick, to be very blunt and honest, I don't think that whatever's appearing in Mineral Point is an actual literal vampire in the sense of a undead corpse that like sleeps in a casket and gets out and sucks the blood of the living. No. Even in a more like real folkloric tradition from Europe or from anywhere, I mean, the legend of the vampire is pretty much worldwide with significant and interesting local differences. But I don't think this is that at all. However, I don't claim to know what it is. It does not seem to just be a person playing around with people. In each case, this is reported to the police. The police take it seriously. They chase the guy in the vampire, in 2 of the 3 times. Sincere efforts are made to catch him, and yet nothing ever goes anywhere. And other than some footprints in the snow and some very circumstantial evidence, no physical evidence is ever recovered. Yet, if this was just some prankster, I think they would have been caught. They would have at least talked about it, and everybody would kind of know who it was. And it's hard to just disappear when you are running up against a wall and the police are right behind you. It just seems really weird. It does seem somewhat like a tulpa. In doing the research for this, mostly I was trying to dig through all the pop culture references that were in the newspapers and such. And just there's a lot of vampires in our culture, in our pop culture, in our TV and movies, TV shows, movies, in novels. We have a real vampire thing for quite some time in the society. Is something drawing on that image? Because this does seem to be like a classic image of this is what a vampire looks like. Why is some entity choosing to wear that suit? I don't pretend to know. But that's what it seems to be. I would also like to make note of the fact that in the 3 cases that I discussed, those are the times that people, one was a police officer, the other 2 times were people reporting it to the police. Think of any other crime and what the percentage is, other than, say, murder, what percentage gets reported versus what percentage actually happens in a crime. I guess being a vampire and appearing to people and going, "Bleh," isn't necessarily a crime, but if something happens, a lot of, especially, and less so than a crime, but if just something weird, something really strange happens, what percentage of people are likely to go and take that to the police and make a report? I would say, especially if they're not in direct danger at that time, not a hell of a lot. People tend to be very quiet about a lot of these incidents. John Keel spoke of the quiet contactees that were, had encounters, but did not want to talk about them. And all the more so in a small community, where you don't necessarily want your name in the paper saying, I saw this Dracula Nosferatu looking creature come after me. But yet, I mean, people did report it. But I would say that for each reported case, there are probably several more that were not reported. And that's kind of the tip of the iceberg phenomena. And it makes you wonder, what is this? Is this connected somehow to the land where people live there? Is this something to do with the special nature of the driftless region, where there was a lot of mining, and which is a part of Wisconsin and part of a couple of other states that has a different vibe to it, as many people have noticed, including myself, that was not crushed by the glacier, and that, for whatever reason, maybe is more open to Earth energies that some have described causing the UFO phenomena, one possible cause for the UFO phenomena. I would really love to know, and I've not been able to dig up anything yet, about other things that people have seen in that immediate area. And there was some ghost activity in the 1800s. There were some things along those lines. I'm thinking mostly of UFOs and orbs and strange lights. I would wonder how often that has happened. And that's much less likely to be reported than a physical tall man in a tree jumping out at people, lunging at people, acting like a disturbed person. An orb floating around probably isn't going to be reported. And I wonder how often that's happened. My guess is not zero, that has probably been something that's happened. And I would just, to continue, the '04 incident, multiple people called that a man, a physical human being, was in a tree and was making threatening motions towards people. The police arrived, saw a person fitting that description, which is dressed like a vampire, okay, and pursued him and lost him. Now, if this is just a person who has some serious problems that are causing him to act like that, he would get caught. He would get caught rather soon, and everybody would kind of know who it was, especially in a quite small town, a village, really. And yet, completely disappeared. Never happened again, just gone. And I didn't elaborate in great detail on the '08 encounter, other than to say that the young people were approached. They were truly scared. And whatever they were encountering was humanoid. It reminded them of, it appeared to them to be a vampire. And that strikes me as, was this something that got some energy out of scaring them? Or was there some other reason that it would be presenting itself this way? There's, it's not unique at all to me, in fact, in any way, to point out that entities are known to display themselves in a form that people fitting a particular culture can relate to. This is one of the core things that Jacques Vallée has talked about. That in a country that believes in Mary, in the Virgin Mary, you're going to have Marian apparitions. You're not going to have Marian apparitions in an overwhelmingly Buddhist country. You're in a country, you may have some Buddhist apparitions, okay? In a country that believes in ghosts, you're going to have ghost apparitions. In a country that believes in some really strange creature of the forest, people are going to see that. Is the classic caped, white-faced vampire our acceptable form that this being takes on to interact with us in Mineral Point. And I guess what I'm left puzzling about is why Mineral Point specifically? I mean, there's a lot of mining in Wisconsin and very few vampires. Okay, what's so special about this particular little area that this entity shows up only there? He doesn't seem to show up anywhere else, which I guess is not that different from a number of other cryptids, if you want to call it that. Cryptids, paranormal beings. I guess the Loveland Frogman is somehow attached to Loveland. He doesn't show up in Oshkosh. He doesn't show up by the Great Lakes. Though it'd be fascinating if that happened. There seems to be some sort of locality basis to these type of infrequently seen beings that I don't know how it works. Maybe that's their jurisdiction. Maybe that's their territory. I don't know how that's decided or why that would be that way. But in this case, it seems weirdly specific. And I found that very interesting. I mentioned earlier the difficulty of finding verifiable, what I would call mainstream media sources, which I always like to have if at all possible. So if I was able to find stuff almost instantly on the 81 case, but if anyone finds anything on the 2004 or 2008 Mineral Point vampire occurrences, please send them to me at vincenttreewell@gmail.com, because I'd love to be wrong. I'd love for the local press or any press to have reported on this. It wasn't that far into the 21st century. I would really love to see some more, I don't know, I guess I need the affirmation of the mainstream media, but yes, I'd like to see some news service putting their name on it, but I was not able to find that. That doesn't take anything away from the articles by the people who I cited earlier and who I'll put in the show notes, because they did seem to do a very good job of describing what happened in a fairly high level of detail. And it's just a weird, fascinating case. And these are the cases that I love. You can get as much Bigfoot as you want, of varying qualities of stories and encounters and evidence. And I'm doing the quotes with my hands while I'm saying evidence, though there is some. But I love the one-off ones, the things that are seen, and this is, even though it's not a one-off, it's very infrequently, and in one specific area, and you just are kind of left, what TF, what happened here? What is this? And, why here? Why then? And as I kind of wrap this up, because, it's harder to listen to my own voice than it is to go back and forth with the guest. If you'd like to be a guest and talk about the Mineral Point vampire or anything else, feel free to contact me. I am looking for experiencers, and I'm looking for people who've done some research, done some investigations, or just have some real interesting theories on what these things are on a wide range of paranormal topics. And so please, if you have something to say and you'd like to talk to me about it, please contact me, vincenttreewell@gmail.com, and I will certainly get back to you. and would very much like to have experiencers, researchers, investigators, and just pure theorists and speculators on the show. Um, in conclusion, the one thing I'd really like to point out is that the last time that this was reported was in 08. It's 2023. We're overdue for an appearance of the Mineral Point vampire. In fact, I guess it scared my dog. You heard him in the background. So will 2023 be the year that the Mineral Point vampire makes his return? We shall see. On that note, this has been The Weird Part. I'm Vincent Trewell. Thank you for listening, and good night.